The sun has left and forgotten me. It's dark.
Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief story maker at Elkins Consulting. I call myself a story maker because I know for sure that if I sit in my comfort zone for too long, I'm not going to make any good stories that can be shared. And the truth is, every story you tell can change your internal message and can change the way people perceive you. If you're curious about working with me or taking my job interview storytelling course for your next upcoming interview, please check elkinsconsulting.com and find the link to my new Udemy course, or reach out to me and we can chat about what working with me might look like. Today's episode is a friend that I met on Facebook, which is interesting because he is actually here in Montana, and we have a ton of mutual friends. He's an author, and has done a lot of different interesting things. I knew he'd be a great guest as soon as we started interacting. And listeners, I think you're in for a treat today. So welcome, Russel Rowland.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
Well, I'm particularly eager to hear about your book later on when we start talking about that, because you've been posting about it in terms of the title and cover image, and I'm eager to hear more about the how you navigated this adventure, because everyone navigates publishing their book a little bit differently, writing and publishing their books differently. So, but let's start where I love to start. And I'm going to ask you to share something about yourself that most people probably don't know about you. And the reason I do this is that we generally have a tendency to, these days, anchor somebody for who they are based on one interaction we have with them. And that interaction is usually on social media. So we decide exactly what a person is like based on a few interactions or one interaction on social media. And I think that's a big mistake. So I love to ask this question so people can get a better perspective of who you are as a complex human being. So what can you share with us?
Well, the first thing that came to mind is actually that I spent a brief period of time writing fortunes for fortune cookies.
Where were you living when you did that?
So this was in San Francisco, and it was actually right after, well, a couple of years after I sold my first novel, which would have been around 2000. And yeah, a friend of mine was approached by a guy that was looking for someone to write fortunes, and he wasn't a writer, so he referred the guy to me. And yeah, I ended up writing fortunes for this guy, and it seemed like sort of a sort of a temporary thing that didn't really mean that much, but it ended up turning into this big deal because this reporter from the Los Angeles Times contacted me about 6 months after I did it and told me that he had tracked me down because he was getting a lot of complaints from people about their fortunes. And the reason was because I decided to take a little different approach to this thing. I never liked fortunes that like promise you sudden success or wealth or whatever. So I tried to write fortunes that were a little more thought-provoking and just gave you something to chew on for a while. And so this guy was apparently getting a lot of complaints. And another thing I didn't realize was that the guy that hired me was the head of a company that basically supplied fortunes to half the fortune cookies in the entire country. So,
Wow.
yeah, I had no
Okay,
idea.
so I need a couple of examples. I mean, I'm sure off the top of your head you remember a
Oh
couple.
boy. It's the sad thing is I lost the file that had all the fortunes in it. So I really, yeah, I have a hard time with that whenever people ask me that because they always want to know. But
Of course we do. Okay, how
Yeah.
about this? If you could write two again, If you had the opportunity, somebody said, I want you to start writing fortunes for fortune cookies again. What's one of them or two of them that you could come up with?
Well, I'm focused on, um, it's kind of interesting because I was just listening to one of your episodes where you talk about, um, not, about redefining the way you think about things. So I I focused a lot on trying to turn failure or disappointment into motivation. So yeah, there, I guess something like, don't let disappointment um kill your spirit. I don't know, something like that, I guess.
And I like that. Yeah, I could totally
Yeah.
see that. I was
Yeah.
immediately going to things like that. And don't believe everything you think.
Right. Yeah, there
And
was a lot of stuff.
I would put check your sources. That would be one of
Right.
my
Yeah, there you go.
fortunes.
Yeah.
And don't anchor people in time.
Yeah, that's good. I like that one.
Yeah.
So
Oh my
anyway,
gosh.
this
That's great.
story ended up being on the front page of the Los Angeles Times, which I did not expect at all. And I ended up being invited to be on 2 game shows because of this story. So it turned into this whole ongoing story that actually resurfaced again just a few months ago when these documentary filmmakers in New York contacted me, and they came across this old article from 2003 or 2, and they're making a documentary about fortune cookies. So they flew me out to New York and interviewed me for their documentary.
That's so cool, Russell.
It's a story that will never end, it seems.
Well, that's all right. I keep coming back to every time I ask this question, I get an interesting answer. This one definitely has legs because I keep coming back to all these ideas about how unusual that is as a career move or even as a job. All of us have had one or two interesting jobs, right? Well, that has to be the top. I have not heard that one before.
Yeah, there's not a lot of us.
That's really cool. That's really cool. So when you think about that experience, you did it for about a year. You probably ended up getting some pretty intense thinking out of it as you're probably hitting a point where you're like, oh man, I can't come up with any more. And then something triggers a waterfall of ideas. So when you think about that time, how do you think it affected the way that you write now? I mean, it had to have had an impact. Did you learn a different strategy for when you have some sort of a block, or what do you think came from that?
Um, I mean, I had this book that I had just gotten as a gift called Great Thoughts. And it was just a book filled with quotes from various people from history, philosophers and politicians and um, writers and all kinds of creative people. So I think I was going through actually a really tough time because I had sold my novel, and then the publisher that bought it was acquired by a larger publisher, and I was not even sure that my book was going to get published. So I think basically it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about earlier, was that I was really having to learn a lot about how to turn disappointments and setbacks into some kind of positive motivation, and just to keep plugging away and keep writing, in order to not get completely deflated by the whole process. It eventually took 3.5 years for that book to come out after all these delays and changes and stuff. So it was hard. But yeah, that turned out to be kind of a nice little bump as far as getting some, you know, just some positive feedback and all that at a time when I kind of needed it. And that's always been important to me, to have some kind of experiences along the way that keep me motivated and enthused about work.
Yeah, I can understand that. I think most of us have to have some nudge periodically, especially if it feels like a trudge and our work doesn't feel meaningful to us. We have to have somebody or something indicate that what we're doing matters.
Yeah.
Tell me about that first novel. I don't remember reading about that.
No, the first novel was called In Open Spaces, and it's loosely based on my mother's family. They were homesteaders in the southeast corner of Montana. So it's kind of an epic ranch family saga. It covers like 30 years in this family's history. I fictionalized most of it, but yeah, some of it's based on our family history. So there's a lot of death. It goes through the depression and stuff. So,
Well,
yeah,
homesteaders, there was a lot of down to that, those
exactly.
decisions that people made.
Yeah, and it was mainly focused on the resilience of those people, how they managed to get through all that without telephones or, anything like they didn't have therapists. So yeah.
Were any of that family still living when you published it? And did they know about it? Did they like it? What was that
Yeah.
response?
Well, the ranch is actually still in our family. So yeah, there's the the people that the novel was based on were not alive, because that would have been my grandparents' generation and even before that. But yeah, a lot of their offspring uh, know about the book, and it ended up becoming a trilogy actually. So that's been interesting, because I'm not a big believer in hiding the skeletons. I think you have to look at your history honestly in order to keep growing and learning about how we become the people we are. So yeah, I've ruffled some feathers along the way, I think. But it's also led to some interesting, like for instance, my mother, who grew up on the ranch, had a cousin who was the same age as her. So they graduated from high school together. And they hadn't really had a very close relationship after high school. So when the first book came out, her cousin read it, and it doesn't present her mother. The character based on her mother is not presented in a very positive light. So she was kind of hurt by that. But they ended up having coffee and talking about it. And they've been communicating ever since, because they had this conversation. So I love that story. I thought that was really cool.
That is such a great result.
I
It
know,
wouldn't have
right?
happened without that book.
Exactly.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
It reconnected these two women
Yeah,
about
and they
something that
had
mattered to them.
exactly. They had such a long history together. I thought it was great that they were able to reconnect. Yeah.
That's so cool. Wow. Okay, so now I can see how having that job of writing um, fortunes for fortune cookies would keep you going. And listeners, here's an idea for you that just popped into my head. If you are writing or trying to write, whether you're trying to write a book or if you're trying to blog regularly or journal, maybe if you get stuck, one of the things you can think about is writing 5 fortunes as if you're writing fortune cookies. Because I can imagine that helping get the ball rolling, start thinking about, well, what do you want to say? What do you want people to know? And how do you want them to feel? And sometimes a one sentence, a short one sentence fortune cookie fortune can really get us thinking. That's what you said was the biggest complaint was that they were not what they were expecting, really. When you open a
Yep.
fortune cookie, you expect you will have great luck this week, right? But to have something that's going to, as your words, make you chew on it for a little while. I think
Yeah.
that's what all of us want in our writing is for people to chew on it for a little bit. Huh.
Exactly.
I'm going to try that.
That's a great idea. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other one that always pops into my head is maybe consider writing greeting cards.
Mm.
Just pretend to be writing greeting cards. What do you want people to hear? What do you think matters to people? And what is your unique message to them? So sometimes that helps remind people why they're doing what they're doing, and it gets them a little unstuck. And then they can send these fortunes or the cards to people and get exactly that positive return that they need to keep going. So I'm liking this idea. I think I'm going to play with this for a little bit. Maybe add it into one of my workshops. I'm going to make myself a note. So you mentioned to me before I hit record that you spent a year in Washington, D.C. doing editing. So I know that. So now we have these 1-year blocks of your writing career that took you really outside of the kind of writing that A, you were going to get paid for, that you enjoyed, and B, that you would make a career out of. Were there others? I mean, we have the 1 year fortune cookie, fortune writing, and then you have the 1 year of editing really dry government documents in DC. What's another one? I bet you have more.
Well, so I worked in an advertising agency when I was in San Francisco. So this was when I finished my first novel when I was in graduate school in Boston. And then I ended up in San Francisco working for this advertising agency, but I was in the finance department. So I was around all these creative people, and my novel actually came out while I was working there, which was kind of bizarre because all these creative people were making tons of money. Advertising, especially in San Francisco, where some of the top agencies are, pays really well. And here I was, getting this novel published and getting a tiny little advance, and it was so
The finance guy.
yeah,
ironic.
sort of be exactly, yeah, to be this published novelist in the middle of all these rich creative people. It was sort of bizarre. Yeah.
That's so cool. The reason I wanted to go here is because the book that you're finishing it now, right?
Yeah, I just finished it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That one is so different from your trilogy that you wrote in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. And I always love to hear kind of the influences that get you to where you are. And I'm hearing some really significant influences that are really, really different from each other and probably different from most novelists, most creatives have. This is pretty unique, Russell. So, so our listeners know, I've been beating around the bush enough. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about your current book that's going to be coming out in the near future?
Yeah, so it's a memoir, and it's called Be a Man. And the subtitle is Raised in the Shadow of Cowboys. So it's basically my story, my family story, my story, but it's got this specific focus on what it means to grow up in the West as a man. So a lot of the stories that I focused on in this book are somehow related to the messages we get growing up in the West about how to handle, being tough or how to handle being insulted or having, being threatened. The basic things that we all saw in the movies growing up here and still see, in shows like Yellowstone. where men respond with anger or violence. That's just the way that we were taught to deal with difficult or complex emotions, and I've really struggled with that throughout my life. As a kid growing up here, I just didn't know how to cope with those kinds of things. So, it talks a lot about how I ended up becoming an alcoholic and had anger issues when I was younger. And so I eventually, thankfully, was able to get help for that. And that's a lot of what I focus on is, we don't have to get stuck in these patterns. There's ways to address them and get help.
It sounds like a pretty intense book. I bet there's a lot of humor in it too, though.
There is some humor, yeah.
Because I can't imagine you writing a book without humor in it.
Yeah, that's true. There's some good stories in there too.
So when you think about the book, I know when I wrote my book, it was because I had been doing these recordings and realized that there are a lot of people that don't know how to tell the stories that matter in their lives. And they don't know which stories to tell. Many people are afraid that their stories are boring or that what they'd talk about wouldn't matter to people. And that's just not true. And I can only do these one at a time. And there's not a lot of income generated from my podcasts. So when I wrote the book, it was to help other people that I couldn't reach one-to-one to help uncover their stories so they would recognize why they were important and how to share them. So when you think about the why behind writing your book, I know many of us write what we need to hear. So a lot of what I wrote was reminders to myself, the lessons that I've learned and why it's so important to continue to learn those lessons and grow. When you think about the why behind your book, where do you go with that?
Well, a huge part of it was, I get so frustrated when I see not only the way that Montana politics handle mental health issues, but also, when you hear national stories about highly high profile people getting caught in domestic violence issues or alcohol abuse, DUIs, it's always really bothered me that so many of these guys get off the hook, either completely off the hook or they give them a month of anger management classes and think that's going to solve the problem. And, I know from my own experience that it took me years of therapy to get to dig in deep into the cause and effect of all this stuff that I experienced as a kid and that continued to haunt me for a long time in my adult life. So that was a big motivation, was to try to shine a light on the fact that these are not easy fixes. These are things that need to be explored pretty deeply. Actually, do you mind if I read the opening quote that I put in here? It's a Desmond Tutu quote.
That would be great. Definitely.
Okay. So this is from Desmond Tutu, who, organized the Truth and Reconciliation Council for South Africa. And I love the way he expresses this. So this is what I put at the beginning of the book. True reconciliation exposes the awfulness, the abuse, the hurt, the truth. It could even sometimes make things worse. It is a risky undertaking, but in the end, it is worthwhile because in the end, only an honest confrontation with reality can bring real healing. Superficial reconciliation can bring only superficial healing. So I love that. And I think that's absolutely true in my life, is that the times that I've tried to brush off deep hurt or things that really impacted me, it just eventually festers and comes out in sideways or, ways that I don't even recognize sometimes. So I just really believe in the taking an honest look at our past rather than trying to deny it or trying to pretend that everything that we did was fine. It was always other people that were making the mistakes.
Yes. I'm so glad you said that. That's a big part of my book as well, is acknowledging when I contributed to my own struggle and my own obstacles. I was my own obstacle many, many times. And you're right. I mean, we have to, if we really want to get through that and come out on the other side better and with healthier relationships with other people, we have to have that healthy relationship with ourselves. We have to look in the mirror and see where we were out of alignment with who we want to be. Somebody just popped into my head, a man that I know he has a really good heart. I know that he is a caring, deeply caring person. I also get the impression that he doesn't think he deserves happiness or a good life, and so he continues to sabotage himself. And one of the conversations I had with him before he went to prison was that I believed that he does deserve a future with happiness, with satisfaction, with relationships that are healthy. And that the only way he was going to do it was to make a choice every day that day he was going to deserve it. And the next day he's going to deserve it. Because the only way to change your behavior is to say, I deserve better than what I'm about to do.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I love that you wrote that. I love that Desmond Tutu quote. That is I remember reading it somewhere. My husband was involved with the U.S. Institute of Peace. He worked with them when he lived in Washington, D.C. And he had this opportunity to put together an extraordinary event called Virtual Diplomacy. And this was in 1997, long before everything was virtual this and virtual that. And some of the biggest names in peace and communication came out for that. It was
amazing.
Really extraordinary. Yeah. It feels like kind of a shame that it doesn't seem to have been sticky enough.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. We could go in a rabbit hole there.
Yeah, for sure. We sure could. So if you were, before we go any further, when is your book expected to be available for pre-order?
Hoping to, I submitted it to the printer just a few days ago, so I'm hoping it will be available within the next couple of weeks, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And that will be not just pre-order, but that people can just buy it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Are you self-publishing this one?
I am. Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. We need to fully support that then. And of the people and places and stories that influenced you in this book and helped you, supported you, recognized the work you were putting in, do you want to name any names or talk about any particular specific experiences, stories that guided you in writing this memoir?
Well, as far as people that helped and have been huge believers, I have to mention my friend Alan Morris Jones. He's an editor in Bozeman. He's a writer too. He's actually one of the most talented writers that I know. He's published novels, nonfiction, children's books, just a lot of stuff. And he had his own publishing imprint for a while called Bangtail Press. And he was the one that published one of my novels and then went on to publish 56 Counties, which was the book about my travels to all the counties in Montana. So he's been an incredible support to me. He's also designed several of my book covers, so he's just one of these multi-talented guys. Yeah. Um, and I have to mention my mom. My mother is 89. She just moved back to Montana 3 years ago from the Bay Area, and she is my biggest fan, no question about it. And she's also got an incredible memory. So I rely on her a lot for facts about some of my memories of the family stories. So she's been incredible that way, but also just like always there, always interested. She reads everything I post online and comments on it.
Okay, one more question about this and the process. Was there a time where you got stuck and you weren't sure if you were going to finish it? And what happened
Yeah,
to get you through that hump?
Okay, this book has been in the works for I was thinking it was 10 years, but I realized a couple of days ago it's actually been closer to 17 or 18 years I've been working on this book. And it has changed forms several times. The first idea I had was to I was gonna incorporate reviews of John Wayne movies as
Which is
part of
perfect.
Yeah. I thought it was a pretty good idea, but it just really didn't work. So yeah, it's gone through quite a few um incarnations, and there have been several times where I just couldn't figure out how I wanted to shape this thing. So yeah, it's been a struggle, actually. Probably the hardest book I've written, but once I finally figured out how to organize it in a way that made sense, that was such a relief. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's such a relief to hear you say this because I feel like I'm in really good company right now. Because I get that. I've had a couple of books that have been kind of in the wings for years and years. And you're offering me some optimism here that I will get back to them, that they will
Yeah.
eventually take form.
Yeah, I think that happens a lot. And, for me, it's always been good to have more than one project going at a time so that when I do get stuck like that, I can just work on something else and let that other thing sit for a while.
Mm, yeah, that sounds about right to me. That's how it's been working for me. But hearing you say that um, as an official writer, I mean, I know I'm a writer, but it's harder to see myself that way when I have not published another one since my book. But hearing you talk about your process and how long it can take, and
Yeah.
starting with one structure and then shifting it and finding the clarity to move into that next phase of writing your book. It's just really, it gives me some confidence and comfort. So thank you for sharing that journey.
Yeah, good. Yeah. I'm glad.
I'm guessing a lot of our listeners will have a lot of that as well, hearing their own stories in yours and giving them some motivation and inspiration to keep going. Keep working on it because it'll come.
It's really the main piece of advice that I think all writers need, is just to keep doing it.
Yeah.
Because we all have an imposter syndrome. Every single one of
Yes.
us.
Of some sort, right? And
Yes.
it may not be a common thing. It may not be not wanting to step out and speak in front of people. It might not be, thinking that you can't write a book because nobody will read it. I mean, it could be something much different from that, but all of us have that edge of discomfort in putting ourselves
Yeah.
out there, I think.
Yeah.
So,
Definitely. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, I love that. Okay, so let's come full circle. I'm still thinking about your fortune cookie job. I can't get that out of my head. It's the coolest job. I mean, I've done some pretty cool stuff over the years. I've done a lot of different jobs, but I have never written fortunes for fortune cookies. So that I might have to seek something like that out. Although I'm guessing that they just don't bother with anything special anymore and they just use AI for that. That would be my guess. But we could do something special with it, right?
Yeah.
We could collect a bunch and actually make specialty fortune cookies with them, with fortunes that people will want to keep. Oh, now I have another idea. We're in big trouble now, Russell. We're going to be in this for the long haul, you and I.
Ready.
Excellent. Well, as we're finishing up, I would love to know when you think about your journey as a writer, as a published author, what is one story in all of the books that you've written? What's one story that you continue to come back to? That's like the one that when people say, well, why are you a writer? What happened that gave you this idea? What's that story?
That's a great question. And I guess the first thing that comes to mind is that, I quit drinking when I was in my 20s, and I discovered books. I had not been a big reader before that. And I was so completely drawn into the world of literature that was just exhilarating. And the reason it sticks with me now is because I had been trying to make a living as a musician before that. I was a music major in college. I got a music scholarship, so I was a decent musician, but I just never really felt that kind of passion or commitment to music that I immediately found when I started reading and eventually writing. So, I decided to become a writer, and it was just incredible how I immediately felt like, okay, this is this is my truth. This is really what I want to be. And I feel pretty fortunate to have had, and I think you probably can relate to this from what you've talked about yourself. Feel really fortunate to have something that I feel this passionate about, and something that I have always, ever since I made that decision, I've always been able to figure out a way to sort of keep that direction going, even when it felt like, it was 11 years from the time I decided to do this until I published anything at all. So
Wow.
yeah,
That's persistence.
I wasn't getting a lot of positive encouragement there. So I don't know where that belief came from that this was something I might be able to do, but it never went away, and I don't know why, but I feel really lucky.
Wow, your readers are really lucky. That's what happened there.
Thank you.
It's not just you.
That's very nice, Stephen. Thank you.
Well, I'm really looking forward to diving into your trilogy. I'm going to be looking that up tonight after I get off this call. And I'm definitely eager to read your book. I think it could be impactful. And unfortunately, the people who really need to read it to understand that toxic growing up without being able to demonstrate your emotions in healthy ways, the people who really need it aren't going to read it. But it is possible that your audience, like me, who will read it, will share it with those people in a way that they can see themselves in it. And it's not just men in that area. I would say women in the West have a tendency that way as well, to be fiercely independent to the point of damaging relationships, because most of us want to help other people. But if we are all fiercely independent, then we're not finding the satisfaction in giving and receiving. And we can't just give and not receive. That's not really how it works.
I say I do address that aspect of the Western experience in the book too, because my mother and her siblings lost their dad when they were 2, and when she was 2, and I think the permanent impact of that was undeniable, and there's just so many examples like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So this isn't just men who need to read this book.
Right.
Well, thank
Thank
you,
you.
Russell. This has been such a pleasure. I've really enjoyed our conversation, as I knew I would.
Well, I really appreciate you inviting me, Sarah. So thanks for the invitation. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it as well.
Thank you. So, listeners, now it's your turn. I already gave you a really fun exercise. If you find that you're blocked in the writing you need to do, whether it's business writing or you're trying to blog or journal, maybe you're writing a book. If you're feeling blocked in your creativity, try writing a handful of fortunes that you would want to find, or you would want somebody you care about to find in their next fortune cookie. Let me know how that goes. I would love to hear from you. And don't forget to keep an eye out for Russel Rowland's book. Just so you know, all of the links associated with this podcast will be with the podcast show notes, and you will be able to follow Russell and all the places that he interacts online and to buy his books at elkinsconsulting.com. Thanks for listening.
You must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.